Hey guys, what's up? RossDunneIE, and I have an issue with the word white people. And I have had an issue with the word white people for a very long time. And when I say white people, I specifically mean in the context that Americans use in a negative light. Now, I am aware of the fact that the term white people does not exclusively belong to Americans, and it does not exclusively belong to American culture, but in recent history, there's an expression very specifically that people are talking about when they talk about white people. The concept of white people obviously originates in Europe, and partly it's an extension of British imperialism. And so I suppose, I'm not American, and I'm not middle class. Best, I'm working class, and I grew up in a council estate in Ireland in the 80s, long before Ireland began to develop into a quote-unquote successful state, and I use that word reluctantly, that it is today. I didn't have anything, and in fairness, I still pretty much don't. But that's kind of not what I'm here to talk about. What I'm going to talk about is this Americentric usage of the word white people, and by extension, in fairness, the subsequent use of the word black people as well. I think a lot of the time Americans don't quite understand the culture that they export to Western Europe, and they do. It's simply a matter of fact. It's packaged in products, television, music, especially music, and in film. This isn't an accident, I don't think. It is an intentional component of American exceptionalism and the ideological export of the American dream. It is a component of what Hillary Clinton once called an international battle of moral ideologies, to paraphrase her slightly. You could think for a hot minute that I'm going to sit here and prepare to begin some sort of arrogant, snooty, typical rant from a European perspective about America, and I'd probably forgive you for that, but I'm not. What I'm pointing out here is the simple fact that America has actively attempted and successfully exported a moral ideological narrative to Western Europe. It's a nuanced ideology, profoundly multifaceted as it is complex as the very concept of America itself. It's neither good nor bad inherently, but individual components of it are good and some components of it are bad. My main issue with this is that America keeps exporting the idea to European nations that have been historically oppressed and taken advantage of, that they too are as guilty of white privilege as non-oppressed and obviously privileged nation states would be. And I'm here to call bullshit on it. I suppose the origin of my displeasure with this concept happened at a genuinely young age. I remember sitting and watching a film which depicted black American slavery in the US in arguably an entire period of human history for which all of us should collectively hang our heads in shame. But the usual murmurs that people do on and off while they're sitting idly and watching a movie occurred between me and my younger sibling, causing him to turn to me and saying, and I quote sort of from memory here, "It was awful what we did to them." I nodded in agreement, knowing exactly what he meant. It was awful what we, white people, did to them, black people. For the longest time after this, I didn't return to that thought, and I can honestly say I don't remember when it popped back into my head in the same fashion or fit into the mosaic of thoughts that developed and became my personality. When considering the greater nuance of European history, and to the greater extent the nuance of my own nation, I sort of began to compare this. You see, as time has gone by, that specific instance has become a profoundly important gem in my understanding of how America has exported its narrative of quote-unquote white guilt to the rest of the world. Now, I have to pause before I go any further on this because I'm veering into some pretty dangerous territory right now. And if I don't clarify some things or at least make some things clear, I'm going to get myself into hell in a handbasket. Greater Western society is responsible for its own brand of slavery. White people enslaved and brutally subjugated black people for the economic and social benefit of themselves. It was and continues to be one of the most historical stains on the consciousness of the West, and to this day it has left a brutal, bloody legacy which disadvantages African Americans and continues to cripple Africa even today. My problem, however, is that nuance is not considered in this conversation. As I mentioned, my depiction of history is broadly accurate. My issue with it is its inaccuracies and the broad strokes that this brush attempts to paint with. and then the packaging of these broad strokes in a media format that is exported to Western European nations, or at least European nations which consume American media. The more accurate and descriptive statement would be, some European nations engaged in slave trading with African nations. Throughout history, European Americans benefited from the historical subjugation of African Americans, and African Americans continue to face profound struggles within a nation which is largely dominated by cultural and economic structures which benefit European Americans. To make it clear and to come to my specific point, I suppose, many European nations did not engaged themselves in the historical acts of barbarism which created the American state and helped to establish the slave trade. Greater Slavia, for example, contrasts to America's collective white people identity, and its internal ethnic differences are certainly not without merit and not without consideration. This is a fine conversation internally for Americans, but it's not fine for the rest of the white people in the world, and America's narrative on white people includes white people who have nothing to do other than to guffaw about the concept of white people. Basically, what I'm saying is, you did it. Not us, you did it. You can call yourselves whatever you want, European Americans, English Americans, German Americans, Dutch Americans, Spanish Americans, I don't care. I just despise this overgeneralized use of the word white people, specifically when it is used to shame white people, because you've exported that notion all over Europe and it's profoundly irritating and profoundly problematic. This brings me back to that day long ago, sitting with my sibling and watching that forgettable 90s movie. Here were two Irish young people acknowledging the horrors of slavery, which is admirable and genuine, but having internalized America's concept of white people. We were absorbing the idea that we, as an Irish people, of all people, were suddenly guilty by extension of our race of the horrors of the European imperial slave trade, and that we shared this load because America's media exports told us that we did. We, as Irish people, whom have been routinely denied our own oppression and any right to complain about being brutally kept under the jackboot for better part of a millennia, were expected to participate in head-hanging and self-shaming by the merit of our skin colour. To this day, I'm pretty stunned by this idea. It's one of the major reasons why I continue to groan and roll my eyes whenever I hear an American student of social studies remark upon white people. It's dishonest, it's broad, and it accuses all of us, even those who are historically innocent, of a horror we did not commit. I'm Ross Dunn. Peace.